everybody. Can you hear me? I hope you can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You can hear me. Okay, good. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me. My name is Greyhawk, and I want to welcome you to the 32nd Annual Native American Festival here at Melville. And we've been having a lot of fun, a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, and a lot of good things going on with our virtual festival that we're doing here. And today, all the way from, where you at, Texas, right?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. Well, all the way from Austin, Texas, we have Miss Amy Bluemel. I always call her Bluebell ice cream because she's so sweet. That's it. Yeah. She's a registered member of the Chickasaw Nation, storyteller, artist, and member of the Chickasaw dance troupe. She travels around the country with the troupe, educating about the Chickasaw and Southeastern tribal cultures. Also works independently, performing in schools, libraries, and camps and festivals. Uh, Miss Amy Bluemel, you might want to tell them a little bit more about yourself.
Nita Kichukma, good morning. Amy Bruton Bluemel, Chickasaw. My name is Amy. I'm a member of the Chickasaw Nation. And I'm excited to be here this morning. Of course, I love getting to see you, and I'm just sad that we're not doing this in person this year, but getting to spend time with Greyhawk and the Moundville folks is always just wonderful. But one of the things I always like to explain to people when I start storytelling is that, people are speaking native languages all the time. And being a native speaker, Greyhawk, because you recognize the words, our words, especially if you're going through, well, all over the United States. But for me, I recognize the Southeastern tribes through the Southeastern United States. But if you go out west, a lot of those names are named for native tribes or by native words. So, like, even the people in Alabama that we're talking to here, at the Moundville Festival every year, Alabama, the name of a tribe, the name of a people, the Tuscaloosa. Like, people will say Tuscaloosa, but you and I know it should actually be Tuscaloosa, and Losa means black. So if you're driving through the Southeast and you see Losa on the end of anything, and it'll be spelled Losa or Loosa, it's telling you something's black. Whether it's the tree, the sky, the bird. Tusca is warrior. Losa is black. Tuscaloosa, black warrior. The state that my people now call home, it's right above Texas. If you say Oklahoma, we would say Oklahoma. Homa means red. So it's another one of those identifiers for a description. It's saying something is red. If you see Homa, Texhoma, Cullahoma, all these places when you're driving through, Oklahoma, Okla is people or man, and Homa is red. It was named by the Choctaw people who speak Muskogean, which we all, the Homa, the Chickasaw, Choctaw Creek, we all kind of share a dialect, like off of the Muskogean tree. So, as you're going to the Southeast, especially if you look at these words and you go, well, I wonder what that is, it's more than likely a native word. One of the biggest ones, well, there's two that I always bring up. People always say to me, who was Tom Bigby? And there is no Tom Bigby. He wasn't a person. When the Europeans asked us, they said, what do you call this river? We said, Tumba Ikpi. Tumba Ikpi. It literally means coffin maker or box maker. And we called it that because that's where the Choctaws were very predominant. There was a group down there and they built these boxes with these little coffins to carry the bones of their ancestors in, because the Choctaw people kept the ancestors with them. So we said Tumba Ikpi, and it became Tom Bigby. The other one that people always talk about is Mississippi. When they say I live in Mississippi, or that's the Mississippi River, it should be, when they ask us our word, we said Misa Sapokni. And when you say Sapokni, it means old. Something's old. If you say Misa Sapokni, it's literally older than time. We believe that river was so old it had no beginning. So to say Misa Sapokni, it meant really, really old, too old for time. And of course, they changed it into Mississippi, and it became Mississippi, and it has been ever since. So if you ever hear that, someone say Mississippi, I would like all of you who are listening now to correct that, I'd like you to say, "Excuse me, it's Misa Sapopni," and they'll think you're crazy, but you'll be right.
I remember the first time we met, which was for a few years back, and
Yeah,
you guys were on the stage, and I was behind y'all, and y'all were talking, and y'all said something, and I laughed, and y'all both, all of y'all looked at me in the back, and did you understand what we said? And I said, yeah. And y'all went, whoa, for you, and they said, oh, forgot. The language is very close,
yeah, and your
very
tribe's the Homa.
close. Yeah.
You're part of the Homa people, which is red. Literally means red, Homa.
Yeah, sure. We were Shakoma. That means Shakoma means red crawfish. We were red
Yeah,
crawfish
you're the
people. Yeah.
crawfish people. Yeah, yeah. I just worked on that with one of the beginning stories out of a mound with the crawfish people. So yeah, there's a lot of history, and the thing that people don't realize about Moundville, and this is something I always try to stress when I'm there, is there's a story in Moundville itself. People come and they think, oh, it's just this big open area and these empty spaces with these mountains. It was a city. It was New York of its time. There were, over 5,000 people at different times living there and living and dying and praying and dancing and working, towards goals. So when people go to Moundville, it always amazes me that I think we're taught more in schools about Egypt and about the Greeks and about, European history than we are about these civilizations that were here. We were architects. We built these huge mounds. We had, societies. We had rules and laws and so it always amazes me that people don't know more. And when you've got a site like Moundville, how lucky that people in Tuscaloosa are to have that in their backyard. And it's such a sacred place for us. It's going home. Every time I get to go back, you feel it. It's home. So
Oh, Amy, I was going to ask you when you first, and I had talked about this the other day when I was asked this question. I'm going to ask you this question: what did you feel as a native, as a person from the Chickasaw Nation, a Muskogean person? What did you feel the first day or the first time you entered these mounds? What was your feeling?
you know, it's one of those things that you walk when we drove in and we saw the mounds. It you get this surge, this rush of but at the same time too, it was very. I'll tell you this: I grew up a military brat, and when people ask me, they're like, "Where's your hometown?" I don't really have a hometown, but if I go to any military base, the minute I go through the gates, I recognize it, and it feels like home. So that base could be anywhere. And when I entered Moundville and drove through, I felt like I was home. Like you just automatically got this release, and you were like, I've come back. So I really believe it's in our DNA. I believe it's in our bones and our soul. You know, that we were there, that we're still here.
Yeah, that's what I felt when we were talking earlier. I said, I felt when I came in early in the morning, and the fog was rolling in on the mounds, and the minute went over those railroad tracks and I saw that mound, it was like, yeah, I'm home. This
It's
is
the
my
same
blood.
feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you dance there, like the first time we danced there at night, that fog came rolling out of the woods and it swallowed up the bases of all the mounds, and they all looked like islands. And it's swirling around our legs that night and the fire, and it was just magical. I was just like, oh, I've never experienced anything like this. It was so cool. And of course, all this, like a lot of the stories I tell, they're really old stories, and they come from these places in Alabama and Mississippi, which were our homelands. Now we're not there anymore because of the Trail of Tears. We were pulled from our homelands and walked to Oklahoma, but our words are there and our stories are still there. Would you like me to tell you a story this morning?
Sounds like a good one. I always love your stories.
Let's see. What story shall I tell this morning? I want to tell the story of Flint. It's not a story I tell a lot, but of course, people always talk about Native people and they say, well, what did you hunt with and how did you live? And everybody knows about arrowheads. And so when you look, I have a whole lot of arrowheads here, different sizes and shapes, different points. Um, And when I travel, I educate. Here's a nice spear tip, or I've got scrapers. I've got all kinds of stuff. I'm a collector, and I collect from a lot of the flint nappers actually at Moundville that are so talented. But so when people talk about arrowheads and hunting and that sort of thing, I always like to tell them where flint comes from. So in the beginning, when Abba Banili created the world, he created all the animals first. And the last thing he created was hatak, was the man, was people. And people were really pretty worthless. They don't have big claws, they don't have sharp teeth, they don't have big thick furs to keep them warm. And so the animals literally felt sorry for us. And they took us aside and they taught us everything we needed to know about survival. They taught us how to make housing and where to find food and how to keep warm. They taught us all these things, and we all got along great. And the animals even gave us language. They taught us to speak. Well, everything went along great until man began to reproduce quickly. And we became more and more and more and more and more, and we got hungry. And people figured out that you could hunt animals, and they're pretty tasty. They got a taste for meat. And at that point, of course, the animals were so hurt that they had helped us. And we had suddenly turned on them and began to hunt them, that they quit speaking to us. And they say that the animals will only speak to us again when the world comes back into balance. Now, one of the ways that we were hunting animals is we figured out at the top of a mountain was a huge, huge, monstrous creature, a big gray man, and he lived in the mountain actually, and his name was Flint. And anytime he came outside, if he wasn't careful, little people, men, would run up and they would take a stone and they would hit him. They would hit him on the ankle or the wrist or the kneecap, and a piece of him would fall off, and they would grab that piece and they would run back. And when they got done with that piece, they would turn it into an arrowhead, into something like this. So Flint became very shy. He didn't like going outside because of these little people that were running around all the time stealing bits of him. Now, the animals had a meeting. They had a meeting to figure out what you do about people, about how to get them to stop hunting. And so all the animals had gathered. You had Janusz, the buffalo. You had Onsi, the eagle. You had Isi, the deer. You had all of the animal people, Foshi, birds, and Luxi, the turtle. Everyone was there. And they're talking about what they do about men. How do they handle the problem of men? And it ends up that Chukfi was sitting in the back, and Chukfi said, he raised his hand and he said, if it was me, I'd just kill Flint. Then you solve the problem of men. And all the animals looked at him and their eyes got large because they hadn't even thought about doing something with Flint. And they were excited and they said, oh, you would do that, Chukfi? You would go and you would kill Flint? And Chukfi's mouth fell open. He said, yeah. If it were up to me, I'd just go right up that mountain and I'd take care of Flint. And all the animals said, go ahead. Well, at this point, Chukfi's in trouble because he realizes he's only this big. He's got a little fluffy tail, no big claws, no sharp fangs, but he decides that he will go and see what he can do. So he starts going up the mountain, up and up and up and up. And when he gets to the door, when he gets to Flint's door, he bangs on that door. Nothing. Nothing. And then he bangs again. The door flies open, and Flint says, Nanta Shibana, what do you want? And Chukfi began to shake. He said, Chokma, Flint, hello. I'm Chukfi, and I thought I would come up and meet you. And Flint stared at him, didn't offer him to come in, didn't do anything. And Chukfi was kind of perplexed. He didn't know what to do. So he says, do you like to eat? And Flint said, I like to eat. And he said, well, if you come to my house tomorrow, I am the best cook in all the land. I will cook everything for you. I will make a feast. And And Flint looked at Chuck and said, every time I leave, there's these little people, and they come out and they hit me and they knock off people. I don't know. Chuck said, no, 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 no. I'll protect you. Just come tomorrow. And Flint agreed. Chuck went down the hill as fast as he could. And when he got down the hill, he got to his house and he spent all night long cooking. He cooked grape dumplings and pashofa. He cooked everything he could think of: corn, squash, beans. He had it all, and he had it ready. And the next day at noon, coming down the mountain, boom, 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 the earth began to shake. Chukfi readied himself. There was a knock on the door. He opened it, and there was Flint. Now, Flint was so big that when he decided to come into Chukfi's house, he had to get down, and he pushed his head through Chukfi's hole, and he got one shoulder through, and then another shoulder through, and he pushed his arms, and he kind of wiggled, and then he got one leg in, and another leg in, and there was a long table in Chukfi's house. So Flint is literally sitting with his head up against the ceiling and a leg running down each side of the table, and he pulls the table up to his belly, and he begins to eat. Now he's eating and eating and eating, and Chukfi is he's running around, and he's trying to keep the plates full, but he has this stick, and he gets this stick and he begins to sharpen it, and he sharpens it and he sharpens it and he works it and he works it, and Flint looks at him and he says, "What are you doing?" And Chukfi says, "No, no, no, nothing. I just have to stay busy." And Flint began to eat more and more and more, and Chukfi worked the stick and he worked the stick and he worked the stick. Flint was very suspicious. He looked at Chukfi again. He said, "What are you doing?" Chukfi said, "No, nothing. I'm just trying to, just trying to keep everything going. I'm busy. I have to stay busy." Finally, Flint had eaten all of the food. And it's just like you or I after a big meal. Flint got sleepy, and he began to kind of doze off, his head nodding back and forth. And he said, "I have to go home." And Chukfi said, "No, Keo, stay with me. It's okay." He's like, "You take a nap. You'll feel better in a little bit. You can go back up the hill." So Flint agreed. He pushed the table back and he slid down just a little bit so he could get comfortable. And pretty soon, Flint was sound asleep. Now Chukfi, he got closer to him and he tapped him a little bit and he said, "Flint." He said, "Flint." And when Chukfi was good and sure that Flint was asleep, he climbed up onto Flint's stomach. And Flint was breathing so hard that Chukfi was literally riding. It almost looked like a surfer. He was on a wave, and he raised that stick above his head, and he brought the stick down as hard as he could. And when he did, do you know what happened to Flint? He exploded. Pieces of Flint flew up into the air. They blew the roof off of Chukfi's house, and Flint rained down all over the world. Pieces of Flint in the forest and in the rivers and water, in fields, everywhere. And Chukfi, the table flipped up and he kept his head below it. He kept his head down and he heard the Flint raining down. And when it got quiet and he thought it was the last piece of Flint, that it was done, he slowly lifted his head up over the table. And when he did, the last piece of Flint flew down and cut the tip of his nose, split it in half. And to this day, if you see Chukfi, he and all of his descendants have a split nose. It reminds them to keep their nose in their own business. And that is how Flint came into the world. So when you find a piece of Flint, you now know how it got there.
That was a great story. That was a great story. That's the first time I hear you say that one.
Yeah. But it's that's the nice thing. You get to tell kind of different stories in different environments.
Well, a lot of people, and I hear this all the time because both of us travel and tell stories everywhere, and they think that all these stories that we're telling are just strictly for children, and they're not. They're teaching stories, and I always tell people Native American storytellers are not just what we call storytellers. We're walking Bibles of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We keep all the traditions and it just basically everything about our culture. You ask one of the storytellers and they can tell you.
You keep the history, you keep the record of the battles and the births and the deaths and the the I love the teaching stories. Don't brag, don't be don't mind your own business. All the things that we need to live in a society and be good to each other, they're all in the stories.
I know you guys. We have stories that are called like custody stories. We call them either ghost stories or scary stories,
Mm-hmm.
and those stories are to keep children, but also people from doing bad things because those stories were invented or told to say, "Hey, this could happen to you if you don't straighten out." So I know you guys have a couple of coast and east stories, and I know we pretty soon we're going to be having our Turkey Moon, which is our Feast of the Dead, and we usually tell a lot of those stories around this time of year, going into October and November. Do you guys have any good coast and east stories, or scary ghost stories? Do you have any of those that you could tell?
Yeah, we do. Well, we do have stories and most of them focus on doing things that you shouldn't do. Like, and I'm not going to specifically tell one, but like some of the bits and pieces I like out of our stories is like there's one where these guys are hunting and they come up in a tree and there's fish living in a tree. And the one guy says, "Oh, easy pickings. Look, we've got dinner." And the other guy says, "Oh, no, no, this is horrible. Why would fish be in a tree? There's something wrong." And so when the one guy eats the fish out of the tree, of course he suffers horrible consequences. And the other guy who didn't, who recognized that nature always tells you what you should and shouldn't do, you know, um, he survives. So when you find things that shouldn't be, you know not to do it. This isn't really a ghost story, but I like the way poison came into the world. Do you remember poison? I like that
Right,
story,
right.
and it's about nature, and I'll tell you that story.
That's cool. I
So
like that story.
yeah, so in the Mississippi, in the Mississippi, there was a beautiful vine, and it floated on top of the water, and it loved the people. So every day the vine would wait because native people always go to water. They would go to water and clean daily and wash daily. So the vine would be so excited to see the people, to see them all coming. And she would be like, "Oh, they're back." And it would literally just make her joyous. But the problem with the vine was that she was very, very poisonous. She was toxic. So as she's floating in the water like this, if anyone brushed against her or bumped her, they would they would get sick, and sometimes they would actually die. And it broke the vine's heart. I mean, she tried everything she could to curl her leaves back and stay away from them, but people would play or kids would get careless and they would bump into the vine, and then it would lead to a long sickness or like I said, even possibly death. And so Vine was so heartbroken that she hurt the people that she loved that she called out to Abba Banili. And she said, "Abba Banili, help me, Creator, help." And the Creator spoke with her and she said, "I don't want the gift of poison that you've given me. It does nothing but hurt people. Can you please help me?" And Creator thought about it and he thought about her gift and what she should do with it. And he said, you may give away the poison, but you must call together all of the little creatures. Call together all the small creatures, and you may divvy it up amongst them. You may give it to one, but you need to call the little creatures who might actually benefit from the gift. So she called for a meeting, and creatures from far and wide came, and some didn't have a great reason for needing the poison, so they were turned away. And the first one that had a good reason was Water Moccasin. And she came and she explained, she said, "Can I please have some poison? For you see, in the water, I'm easy prey. People paddle over me and they hunt me and they pull me out of the water. They toss me and I get hurt or they take me and my children. She's like, but if you gave me some poison, I would literally paint the inside of my mouth white. And when they approach, I will open my mouth wide and I will show them the white skin and they will know to stay away from me. And the vine thought about it and she said, okay. And she gave her a little bit of the poison. The next small creature that made sense, that had a valid reason for needing poison, was what we now call rattlesnake. Rattlesnake came up and said, oh, it is terrible where I'm at. People step on me all the time. It's very hard. No matter what I do, I'm getting hurt or they hunt me and there's nothing I can do to protect myself. May I have some poison? And if you give me poison, I will tie a rattle to my tail and I will shake that rattle. And the people will know to avoid me. I will warn them when I see them coming to stay away from me. And the vine thought, this is a great idea. So she gave that snake a little bit of poison. And then she heard a tiny, tiny voice that said, I would like some poison. She looked, and there she saw bee, the little tiny yellow and black bee. It said, may I have poison? For you see, my family and I, we make these great combs and we have honey that we use to feed our children. But people and animals, they just come and break the hives apart and eat all of our work. If we could have some of the poison, we would carry it in our tails and we would hold it, we would value it so greatly that if I choose to sting, the stinger will stay with the person who is attacking and I will lose my life. I would die before I use the poison, or as I use the poison, I will die. Can I have some poison? The very last of the poison the vine had, she gave to the bees, and the bees could protect themselves. And as she floated in the water, she was so happy the next morning when she saw the people coming to water and she knew she could not hurt them anymore. She was so happy that she burst into blossom. And that is how you get the water lily. That's the story of poison.
Wow. It's funny because, as you know, we go from one nation to the other, one tribe, one group to the other. We have that same story,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you've heard me say our version of that story before, and because you know at the end with us, the last animal to get the poison is the pygmy rattlesnake, and then there's another other version where it's the small coral snake. You know, and there's two different versions that we have, but you know, we have the Homas have the pygmy rattle, and the other version is coral snake. But our plant, well, your plant is the water lily. Ours is the marigold
Mm-hmm.
because the marigold
It's
becomes a
it's
medicine plant.
well, and I find
So
that the stories, it's almost like if you get 40 people in a room and you play telephone, the old game that we used to call telephone, and you
yeah,
whisper something in the first person's ear and it goes all the way across. By the time it gets across to number 40, it's the same story, but it's slightly different. As
right,
each person
right,
has picked it up, it's tweaked. And also, too, I mean, you have to look at the animals that you're dealing with around you. If you
right.
were in a certain area and you had never seen a coral snake, you wouldn't have, talk about a coral snake, but you talk about a water moccasin. So I find it so interesting that and really, if you go across cultures, even if you go to Africa or to the Vikings or to China, they all have these basic stories that tell you about the dragons or about, every culture has a Cinderella. Every culture has how rabbit got his tail or why there's poison or why the moon does what it does. Yeah, so I find that stories are really the common thread. They're the common thread for all of us.
One of the things I do like about us throughout the years hanging out together, but also being at Moundville together, is that I get to sit there and listen to a lot of storytellers, Cherokee storytellers and Muskogean storytellers that have come up, but also, you and I travel a lot. So we meet a lot of storytellers from all different nations. And, and you're right. You sit there and you listen and you realize that we have a lot in common because a lot of our stories are very like our rabbit stories. Your rabbit stories, rabbit's a trickster.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is a trickster. But you go to other places, the coyote's a trickster.
Yeah, if you're
You
in the
know?
Southwest, the Coyotes, the Pacific Northeast has Raven.
Yeah.
Some of the tribes on the East Coast have Otter. Otter's a trickster, or he can bring back
Right.
the dead. So it just depends on where you're at and the animals around you. You know.
So yeah, it's great. Like I said, I like if when people come here to Moundville and come to our festival, and then now too, because we are also on virtually. We've got a couple of storytellers that can tell stories, and if you sit there and you listen to all of us, you're going to hear some similarities. And but here at Moundville, if you sit at that stage and you go hear all the storytellers, you realize that we're all cousins. Definitely, we're definitely related
Yeah,
at one point.
we're all out of the same. I always think of Moundville as like the oak tree. It's the tree, and then all of us that came from there, we're the acorns, and the acorns carry a part of that tree, but they make their own tree, in different areas. So you have all of us coming out of the same place, but slightly different. You know.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. I know you have some items that you because I know we have a story about how stickball was. You probably have that same story or something very similar
Yeah,
about how stickball came about, and I heard that you had some stickball sticks there that you might be able to show.
yeah. I've got so much stuff. This is it makes me happy. My husband always laughs. He's like, one day I want to see you on that show with the people that have too much stuff because I'm constantly bringing home new things. But stickball, we call it tori. And for people who don't know what stickball is, if you see these are basically um, what they call, they're still playing it. They call it lacrosse now. And if you go to actually people like the Choctaws and Chickasaws and people like that, they're still playing stickball as well. But I always call this the grandfather of lacrosse. So you have the sticks and you have these balls, and the balls they're made of leather. You've got wrapped around a hard piece of wood, a ball shaped piece of wood. They say in the old days they may have been a nut or things like that. And basically, stickball was played when you wanted to settle something. So, like if you had a fight with another tribe about hunting areas or about waterways, and you said, this is ours, and they said, no, it's ours, you might call for stickball. And we called it the little brother of war because you would get up to 1,000 warriors on a mile-long course, and they'd all be carrying these sticks, and they would have one ball, and your job is to try to run this course, and at each end there is a pole, and that pole, if you can take the ball and you can throw it, or you can touch the pole with your sticks, if you can literally reach up and touch it, you get a point. And basically, the games were only called when there were too many injured or dead to continue. But once it was done, once that happened, then it was done. There was no more fighting about it. They didn't go into each other's camps and continue. They said, okay, you've won the rights to the waterway, you've won the rights to hunt there, and we're going to pull back. So we called it the Little Brother of War. We still play it. It is not as violent as it used to be, but it's a tough game. And we even have like little bitty sticks. These are the sticks that you would use for kids. So they've got their own little tiny balls and their little tiny sticks, and they're out there still. People don't realize that this culture, the Southeastern people, they're still alive and well. We're still continuing on with the games, and Mississippi Choctaws have huge like World Series type games of stickballs. So
Oh
we're
yeah,
still
they still like yeah, you're right. They have their World Series or their Super
yeah,
Bowl, I guess you'd call it.
it is, and they're
Oh
serious.
yeah,
That's a
and
serious
it's
game.
rough.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like you were saying earlier about the one, it's the same thing as our language and everything. You go from one
Mhm.
nation or one tribe to the other, and you will see the ball done differently. You know, you go some that have
Also see the laces, like how each person laces
right.
their stick. This is how we do it, but the Choctaws have a different way of doing it, and each tribe, they'll tie off slightly different. Depends on who taught you to do it. Was it your grandfather and he tied it this way? Is it tribal? Yeah, so you can tell all these little things by just looking at the balls or the actual rackets, the sticks.
Yes, and in the sticks, you go from one nation to the other. You'll see hickory or you see pecan, which is actually the same family.
Yeah,
And then when we did our ball, we would take it in the middle. Since you were using the hickory stick, you use the hickory nut as the center, and then you wrap it around that hickory nut. You
yeah,
know.
yeah, and it's just incredible how they're all the same, but they're all slightly different. Also, if you go up in Oklahoma too, I've actually seen people that make bow dart
Oh
too,
yeah.
because they moved into Oklahoma and that's what you have available. So, and then, I was talking to some Choctaw people and they said they were actually taken up to the East Coast where they play lacrosse, and the lacrosse people there, the tribes there, told them that it came from Tolan. So it spread across. That's the other thing I don't think people realize. Native people had trade routes. We were trading all the way up to Wisconsin, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, going across. It was a business. It was a society that traveled, and news spread. It wasn't like we were all totally isolated and no one was aware that there was another tribe 200 miles away. No, we knew them and we traded with them.
Yeah, it's like down where we're from and down here, even at Moundville, they have found Catlinite, which is from Minnesota. They found greenstone, which is from the Great Lakes here, and they found pieces of our pottery. Yeah,
Yeah, and
copper and pieces of our pottery that they found up
getting
north.
yeah, and the
Was
big
that?
whelk, all the carved
Yeah.
shells are people that you don't get whelks and ponds in Alabama. You have to
No.
be traveling and trading great distances, up and down the rivers. The Tuscaloosa was a highway, or the Black Warrior River. I always call it the Tuscaloosa River because I think of it in terms of what the name means, but the Black Warrior, it was a highway. This people were traveling that and bringing goods in and out. I always like too that I always call us the original recyclers, because there was nothing we didn't reuse. There was nothing we didn't find a use for. And I have some other things too, like these rattles. I like to show my rattles. Whoop. The rattles, like now when our dancers dance, when the women dance, we wear turtle shells on our legs. And you'll also see men, and they'll dance with a rattle like this. So you've got the turtle shell, and then you've got a piece of hide or skin, and this one's actually decorated with a spent bullet casing. So we were actually using anything to decorate. We still do. So this one is made by a guy out of Oklahoma, and then we also had different kinds of gourds. Look at this gourd. I love this guy. I think he's so interesting looking. I got this at Moundville a few years ago. I won this in one of the silent auctions. And then you just have these little simple board rattles too. So we used everything. If we could get a turtle, if we could get a rattle, a gourd. This one, my dog brought this up. Actually, a dog brought it up out of the woods. So this turtle had been gone for a long, long time. You can tell by the shell that he's very worn and weather beaten, and brought it up. And I had a friend who closed the bottoms on it and put some pieces in it and made a rattle out of it. So we used everything. If we took an animal, we used everything. There wasn't anything we didn't use. So we are the original recyclers. And I always kind of try to encourage people now, reuse it. Think about it before you buy it. Do you need it?
Yeah, when you were talking about the rattles, about the turtles and the gourds, you also had deer toe rattles
Deer
that you make
toes.
out of deer toes, and then we also had
Yes. Buffalo horn.
buffalo horn rattles. Yeah, we did have
Yeah.
buffalo down here, so
The woodlands at one point. And even when we didn't have them anymore, we were still trading. There were still, we were still getting supplies. So people don't realize that it wasn't a isolated group. We actually knew all about our environment. We knew who we were talking to hundreds of miles away.
Amy,
What
do
about
you,
you?
I want to ask a question. Do y'all have any turtle stories or buffalo stories?
We do have turtle stories and buffalo stories. I like turtle a lot. One of my favorites is, well, shall I tell it for you?
That sounds like a winner. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So it's how Turtle got his shell. Now, Turtle was best friends with Possum in the beginning, and they were best friends. And every day they would go down to a persimmon tree. And when they got down to the persimmon tree, Possum would climb way up into the tree, and he would call down. He would say, "Look, see," which is Turtle, and Turtle would say, "Ee, yes," and he would say, "Look, see here," and he would drop the persimmon, and the turtle would stand with his mouth open and his eyes closed, and he would snatch that persimmon and choo ma good. And they did this every day with Possum crawling around in the tops of the persimmon trees, dropping the persimmons down, and look see the turtle snapping them up. Now, at this time, animals were different than they were than they are now. For instance, the possum who was in the tree had the most beautiful tail in the world. And of course, Turtle had a shell that was shiny. It was one piece. It was so beautiful, you could almost see your reflection in it. And he was very proud of it. So every day, Possum and Turtle would go down the persimmon trees and they would drop the fruit, and Turtle would eat. Well, one day while they're there in the shomba, a wolf came by. And the wolf lay there and he's watching what's going on, and he decided he wanted a persimmon too. But instead of walking up and asking, he got down in the grass. He got very still. And as Looksy stood there with his mouth open and his eyes shut, and Possum dropped that persimmon, Nashoba jumped, snatched the persimmon, and disappeared into the grass on the other side, leaving Looksy with nothing. He opened his mouth, he opened his eyes, he looked. There's nothing. Now, Possum had seen what had happened, and he decided to let it go. It's not worth it. Wolf got a persimmon. So he said, "Looksy, he was ready. He went to drop the persimmon. The turtle had his eyes closed, his mouth open wide. And right as Possum dropped that persimmon, Nashoba jumped back, grabbed the persimmon, and disappeared, leaving Looksy again without anything to eat. Now, Possum decided he'd had enough and that he was going to teach this wolf a lesson. So as Looksy sat there with his mouth wide open, getting ready for the next persimmon, Possum kept an eye open, and as he started to act like he was going to drop it, Nashoba jumped and Possum threw that persimmon as hard as he could. And when he did, it went straight down the wolf's neck, and he couldn't breathe, and he fell over dead. Now, Possum and Turtle were shocked. They didn't know what to do. And Possum came out of the tree and he said, "Oh, Looksy, we must leave." He says, go home and tell no one what happened. It was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted to teach him not to steal." But Looksy was very proud of the fact that there was a wolf there, and he said, "I'm a mighty hunter, and I'm going to tell everyone that I'm a mighty hunter." Now, Possum begged him. He said, "No, no, no." He said, "Don't, no, this is terrible. This is a horrible accident." But Looksy couldn't help himself. He began to go all around the village and tell everyone how he had killed Nashoba. He had killed the wolf. He himself, the small little turtle, had taken out this huge predator. Well, the thing about a story is when you tell a story to one person, they'll tell it to two or three more, and those people tell it to three or three more, and eventually the story spreads. And the story spread about this brave turtle fighting this very vicious wolf, until finally it reached Nashoba's people, the wolf clan. And they heard how Turtle had murdered their brother for no reason. They began to look for Looksy. They went all around looking for him until finally they saw him coming down the road. Now, one of the things that Looksy had done, he had taken the wolf's ears and he had made a pouch that he could show people how brave he was because he had kept the ears of the wolf. Now, when the wolves came upon him, he had this pouch hanging around his neck. And the wolves looked at him and said, "Looksy, what is around your neck?" He said, "Nothing." They said, "Looksy, move your hand." He said, "Nothing." They said, "Looksy, move your other hand." He moved it, and there hung the pouch with the wolf's ears. Now the wolves were angry. They said, "Oh, that is our brother. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And they begin to talk amongst themselves. And the one goes, "I know. Let's eat him." And all the wolves got ready. And looks, he said, "Wait, wait, wait. If you eat me, I'll give you a stomach ache. You don't want to eat me." And the wolves looked and they talked amongst themselves. And they said, "What do we do? What do we do? What do we do?" And one of them said, "I know." He's like, "We'll start a fire. We'll get some water in a pot. We'll boil it and we'll boil him alive." And Looks, thought about it and he said, "You see these feet? I have big, strong feet. If you put me in a pot, I'll kick a hole in it and the water will go out and you still won't kill me." And the wolves thought, they said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And one of them said, "I know. We'll take him to the Misasapokni, the Mississippi, and we'll throw him in and we'll drown him." Now Turtle began to scream, "No, no, not that." And they dragged him all the way to the Mississippi and they threw him in. Well, when turtles go into water, they go in on their belly. Well, they threw him in and he was upside down and he shot to the bottom. And when he got to the bottom, there was a rock. And he hit that rock with his shell and the shell shattered. Now he flipped over and he could see the wolves running up and down the banks, and he stayed hidden until they had decided they had completed their mission and they left. And Looksy, he came up and he took a breath and he came out onto the land and he looked and his shell had shattered into 13 pieces. It hurt. He called out to Ant, who he saw going by, "Brother Ant, can you help me?" And Brother Ant agreed, and all the ants climbed onto the shell, and they took weed, and they sewed each piece back together. And then they took mud and made poultices, and they put it over all of the stitches and held it in place. And eventually, the shell healed, and when it did, the reeds disappeared, and the poultice fell off. And the shell was much darker. It looked kind of dirty at times, and it had lines where each break had happened. And Looksy felt terrible about his shell. It had been so beautiful. He began walking down the road one day, months later, and who should he bump into but Nashoba and his people? And all the wolves, they stopped and they looked at him and they said, "Oh, we killed you." But one wolf out of the back looked and he said, "No, no, we didn't kill him. Look at his shell. We killed someone else. This guy's fine." And they let Looksy go on. And the lesson of that is, not every bad thing that happens to you is a bad thing. And that is how Turtle got his shell. And you can see all of the little shells where it was, all of the pieces where it was sewn up. That's Turtle's shell. So what are we looking at on time here? I can't see any kind of clock.
All right. We were on mute. I'm sorry. But that was a great story. I enjoyed that. That was about it. Actually, it seemed like time went by so fast.
Well, anytime you're sharing our stories and I get to talk to you and I get to talk about Moundville, I love it. I have the best job in the world. I get to talk to people I love, you and all of the people at Moundville. That's the sad thing. Like usually I have people that'll show up at Moundville and they're like, "We've been coming to see you for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years." And I'm really going to miss, I hope they're there today and I hope you're seeing me and I hope next year I see you. But I do have the best job because I talk about people and things I love and I get to spend time with them. So thank you so much, Trogmashki, for having me today. And
All right.
I really hope we're together soon.
Amy, thank you for being with us. I can't wait till we meet each other again, person to person, where we can share stories. And I want to thank everybody that has enjoyed this storytelling. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you have any comments, please send them to us. Tell us how you like this program. And we have a lot more that's going to go on this week. And please stay tuned to all of the things that are going to be going on here at Moundville. Again, from Greyhawk, Moundville, and Miss Amy, you guys have a great day and tune into the next performance, the next program, and Hope you have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Chipisa Lacho.
Yokoki.